Meeting and speaker series. Thank you. My name is Nicole Netherton. I'm the Executive Director of Travis Audubon. I'm so glad to see you all for this first speaker series of the fall. When we had our last meeting back in May, we were in COVID stage 2. It's a little painful to remember. I'm very sorry that the Delta variant has further foiled our plans to get back to in-person meetings, but once we're out of stage 5, Travis Audubon board and staff will be reassessing our in-person meeting policies, and we hope to have more options, more safe options going forward. So I'm very glad that you're here with us virtually tonight, and please do everything you can in these strange times to stay healthy and well. If you are a member, thank you so much for your continued support. If you are not yet a member, I hope you'll join us. You can go to the membership page on our website, which is travisaudubon.org. I have 2 quick announcements for you. You'll hear from our speaker, Heidi, tonight about how to help birds avoid collisions with buildings, but you can immediately apply what you've learned before you go to bed tonight. And a huge way that you can help right now is to participate in Lights Out Austin. Peak migration is happening now. In fact, the bird cast from Cornell for tonight, September 16th, is very high, the highest level. So if you please turn off all your non-essential indoor and outdoor lights from 11 p.m. to 6 a.m., we will help birds migrate safely overnight. As you know, fall migration takes a long time, so turning your lights off overnight really until Thanksgiving will help birds as they fly south. So thanks so much for helping us with that. If you are interested in volunteering to monitor for bird building collision victims downtown, we have a team doing that very early morning work, and you can contact my colleague Kaylee Zazula for details about participating. We also have beautiful yard signs available if you would like to share Lights Out Austin information with your neighbors. And please go to our website to get on the list for a sign if you don't have one already. The other exciting announcement I have is that registration is now open for the virtual Victor Emanuel Conservation Award Luncheon, which takes place on October 8th. As you may know, we will be honoring the late Greg Lasley, and I really hope you'll join us. Remember that it is free to attend, and if you do decide to join us, I can guarantee that you will feel uplifted and amazed by Greg's life and contributions to conservation. You can again find more information on our website, as well as check out sponsorship opportunities and other ways to get involved. And I'd like to highlight that you can order sugar cookies that are printed with images of Greg's famous nature photography, so you're not going to want to miss that. Okay, let's get started. And I think you might remember what we need to do now. If you could please mute your microphone and turn off your camera, I think you in advance. If you can enter any questions in the chat for the Q&A session that we'll have with Heidi at the end. And we will post this recording on our YouTube channel after we're done, so you are welcome to share it with anyone who happened to miss it. So here is my colleague, Kaylee Zazula, who will introduce our speaker. Hi, Kaylee.
Thank you, Nicole. My name is Kaylee Zazula, and I'm the program manager for Travis Audubon, and I will be introducing our speaker tonight, Heidi Trudell. Heidi is tired of picking up dead birds. She is a biologist turned architectural consultant who has been involved with bird and window collision research and prevention since 2003, and she has monitored wind farms as well. Her passion for bird conservation has led her to serve on safe passage committees, including current work with Detroit Audubon and Black Swamp Bird Observatory. In Texas, she was known in the birding community as an actual birder from 1998 to 2014, with collision work done quietly on the side. To learn more about her work, find Heidi at justsavebirds.com and her Facebook groups Just Save Birds and Dead Birds for Science. I'll also include those in the chat. In a former life, she collected Christmas bird counts, guided on the upper Texas coast and in the Rio Grande Valley, and fell in love with moths in far west Texas. So here we go, Heidi.
I was unmuted, huh? All right. Hi, thank you all for being here. I realize this is kind of a not the happiest topic, but at least it is quite timely. So without further ado, yeah, welcome. This is going to be kind of a very quick blitz of background information, and then we'll spend an awful lot of time looking at things that you can tangibly do. So we're going to start with why birds are important, things that threaten them, the concerns of artificial light at night, daytime strikes, which is where we will spend the most time, along with action. So y'all are birders. I don't think I need to explain why birds are valuable. But unfortunately, when giving these presentations to non-bird audiences, you kind of have to remind them that birds are pollinators and life as we know it would be completely different without birds. Personally, they are deeply meaningful, I think, for all of us. But beyond that, they keep the planet doing what it's supposed to be doing. So real quickly, birds are at risk literally everywhere. Specifically, most commonly, where humans also exist. Obviously, human impact stretches far beyond actual human residential areas. One of my favorite anecdotes at this point is not so much anecdote as I believe it was published in 2012 off the coast of Alabama. Something like half of the tiger sharks have songbirds in their stomach contents. And a large part of that is thought to be because the lights on oil rigs distract migrating birds, which then get disoriented and end up exhausted in the water. And the sharks have figured out that that's a fantastic buffet. So there are a lot of things that we don't actually realize we're influencing, but are significantly impacting populations. Which brings us to our downer slide of the state of birds. The last batch of information from 2019 highlights the plight of basically everything. Most of what my work covers is forest birds, songbirds, neotropical migrants, but everything across the board is very much impacted by human activity. So that is where we get to the things that we can tangibly control. With buildings, it's thought that between 599 million to 1 billion birds a year in North America alone are killed courtesy of glass. The only thing that is worse than that is cats. So I strongly suggest everybody look up this fantastic comic. theoatmeal.com/comics/cats_kill is an amazing explanation of how and why cats are such good hunters and what the impact is truly of their outside activities. So quickly, catios are amazing. Seattle Audubon has a catio tour. This is something that can be done pretty much anywhere, everywhere, and it's great for cats, it's great for people, keeps everybody safe. Or you can leash train your cats. This is a very oppressed cat who is clearly suffering terribly while exploring the environment. Newt is the most beautiful cat I've ever seen. Not my cat, but yeah. So cats don't have to suffer. With adequate enrichment, they can be perfectly happy inside, in catios, or on leashes. And we're gonna jump straight into light pollution next, because we're gonna very quickly celebrate. Ann Arbor literally just passed last week a new lighting ordinance, which it's so awesome. Basically, it covers what kinds of lights cannot go up, what spectrums of lights should not be used, and it's a huge step in the right direction. And I was a fly on the wall for it, but yeah, it's been a couple of years in the works. Anyway, so this slide kind of explains how lighting fixtures can be extremely bad. Growing up in Houston, I thought I knew everything because NASA was like 2 miles from where I lived, and so everything I did was, field trips, weekend things, like growing up there, you think you know space. And then it wasn't until I moved out to West Texas that I was like, oh, that's the Milky Way. In Houston, you really can't actually see the stars. So that was a big wake up for me. And I've gotten more involved in light activism since then, or dark activism, I guess. So yeah, in residential areas, none of us like having our neighbors' lights in our faces while we're trying to sleep, but it's beyond just the uncomfortable glare of it. It's not safe, and it's actually super bad for human health. Melatonin suppression is not a good thing. And that is what we are unwittingly doing to ourselves by having improper lighting fixtures, lighting colors, and just general lighting. Which also then brings us back to the birds. So the post tower in Germany, and this is kind of like what just happened in New York. You have a combination of environmental factors and artificial lighting. So the post tower is in the middle of a fantastic, the Rhine River Valley, fantastic swath of habitat, and it was killing approximately 1,000 birds a year until they turned the lights off at night. Now it still does get about 200 birds a year, but that's because they legally cannot turn off the emergency elevator shafts at either end of the building. So that's unfortunate. And I should note, this is only at night. I don't know what they're doing about daytime strikes, but that's a totally separate ballgame. But I mean, just turning off their lights dropped 80% of the strikes. And that has actually been documented in Chicago as well. So this is not just a whimsical number that happened to work out for this building. It is really a super easy and money-saving option for buildings. Next up, unfortunately, this is the direction that construction is going. Older buildings are shorter, they have more masonry. Newer skyscrapers are very, very glass intensive. They're also extremely inefficient, and some building codes are going away from glass facades because they are so extremely inefficient. The heating and cooling costs are just absurd. So that's awesome. But also in the meantime, there's an off switch. We have timers, we have motion sensors. There are all kinds of ways that we can reduce artificial light at night, reduce, dim, redirect. There's so many options, and it's super easy, and it reduces carbon footprints. And I want to say it was the FBI building in DC saved over 20% on their electric bill just by turning their lights off during migration. So year round, there you go, you get the perks. And while we're skipping on through, my specialty, daytime collisions. When you walk away from here, I want you to be able to recognize both the scale of the problem, where to find them, what they look like. We want to make sure that we clear up some of the myths and make sure that when you see things, you can be prepared to fix them and or work with them. And be empathetic, because people hit windows too. And I don't know who designed this building, but they put glass panels between a column and a wall directly in front of both bathrooms in this building. And as you can see, they rather haphazardly put masking tape X's over the glass because so many people were walking into them. So we can't just blame birds because this is a universal phenomenon. So quick case study. The last couple of years I've been in Southeast Michigan, and my most problematic local building faces about a 40-acre woodland, and it is pretty darn reflective. So you can actually see this big red dot down here in the corner has a giant chunk of green behind it. And the other red dots over on the right side of the map have slightly less big dots, but those correlate size-wise to the number of dead birds found at each building. So I will point out that the total monitoring number is only what was detected. Unfortunately, or fortunately, scavenging rates are really high, so detection rates are extremely low. So absolute best case scenario, I was finding maybe 30% of what hit, probably under 20%. But yeah, so the library itself was killing twice what the second top buildings were killing, which says a lot. And that's why fixing extremely bad buildings is really important, because you can fix a bunch of these small ones and not have the same overall effect as fixing one extremely bad one. And this day was rough. On my way back to the car after taking this picture, I picked up 2 more hummingbirds. So trying to explain to building owners that, like, no, your building is not doing population level damage is not the point. The point is, these are not our birds. They're coming from somewhere else. They're going to somewhere else, and we're just haphazardly killing them in the process of traveling. So this was one of the slides that I shared with them to highlight that this is bad and we are the problem. And unfortunately, globally, we are up to 1,359 species updated as of the 3rd of March. Yeah, so basically the risk factor for birds, basically if there's glass nearby, they're at risk. So the more glass, the higher the risk. And unfortunately, humans are really good at putting glass a lot of places. But Heidi, why are there not birds literally everywhere? Well, I'm glad you asked, because if you're not looking, you're not going to find them. And even when they do hit the ground, hummingbirds in less than 24 hours can be completely desiccated and carried away by fire ants, normal ants, lawnmowers, squirrels, chipmunks, and they're really just not that easy to see. There we go. Yeah, so unfortunately up here, hummingbirds are anywhere from 17 to 20% of what we find at low-rise buildings. So that's really hard at a personal level, and also when you're trying to explain to people. But yeah, you're not going to necessarily see everything that hits because a lot of them are extremely tiny. So since I can only see some thumbnails and I can't actually see a whole lot of interaction, I will just assume that folks are riveted by this side-by-side comparison of the same photo in which I invite people to count the warblers. Fall warblers and fallen leaves are extremely similar looking. In rocky areas, you have rock-colored birds and bird-colored rocks. So it's kind of like finding a puzzle piece that's just not quite the right shape and texture. So if anybody spotted all 5 of the warblers, then you get a gold star and you get to monitor birds. Yeah. And I am willing to bet that the people who were smoking did not even notice these birds were there. So the big problem is that birds cannot see glass, and that is our job, to make them be able to see it, to modify the glass to make it safe for them. And so yes, migratory species are disproportionately impacted because they are moving around the most. It's not natural selection. Birds of all ages, shapes, sizes, and health conditions can hit. It's basically there are no birds that can inherently see glass, just as there are no humans that can inherently see them if it's not framed or posed in a way that our brain registers as having a barrier. See also things that are hard to find. There's a red-winged blackbird, which again, from a distance, most people aren't going to notice that. So some of the myth busting. Of the 50% of birds that strike and die on sight, the 50% that do survive, we don't actually have great statistics on. For birds that go to rehab, the Chicago, the Cleveland, the New York birds that are caught super early in the morning by dedicated volunteers who are out there with their bags as the bird is actually actively falling, those birds have close to a 60 to 80% survival and release rate. For low rises, when we don't necessarily know when they hit, when we don't necessarily have the ability to get them to rehabbers in a timely manner, there's so many unknowns, the survival rate for those birds tends to be closer to 30%. So it's almost an inverse correlation there in terms of when things are found and whether or not they live, which is also really distressing because most of the birds that hit high rises hit before 9 a.m. and most of the birds that hit low rises hit after 9 a.m. So figuring out what time of day to check things is also going to impact whether or not you find stuff. But while things are on the ground, they're at risk of getting eaten or stepped on or moved by literally everything, including people. People will pick up dead birds and observe that it has a broken neck, and that is extremely rarely the case. Birds have so many vertebrae that if they're fresh, their neck will be floppy. If they're not fresh, their neck will probably not be floppy, or if they're ripe, shall we say. But that is not a symptom of the injury. That is a symptom of them having lots of vertebrae. So most of the injuries are blunt trauma, concussion type internal injuries that we don't see, which is why any bird, if you can grab it and it's fully feathered, that's anywhere near a window, it needs to go to rehab immediately, which is why we have ahnow.org. So the critical part of a live bird that has hit a window is making sure that it gets supplemental oxygen, pain meds, and anti-inflammatory meds. So most people are not equipped to do that. Unless you're professional, don't attempt to give medical aid to a bird. Don't provide water, don't provide food. Just call a rehabber. Even if you can't get it to a rehabber, calling to make sure that you are following their protocol is extremely helpful. So Animal Help Now is both a website and an app. It basically looks at where you're located. If you're looking at something up on behalf of someone else, then you definitely want to put in their location information. But this is an example from my corner of the planet right now. So you can search by animal type. They do all wildlife. But in our case, we're curious about birds. So you hit bird and it pulls up a long list, or whatever list is proximate to your location, of the rehab places in your area. So you end up with phone number, location, email, all kinds of information to get you in touch with people who can help with your situation. So highly suggest even just exploring the website because it's amazing. And now that we know what to do when we find things, here's how and where to look. So basically, structural traps are corners of buildings, U-shaped corridors, courtyards, anything where a bird is not necessarily able to fly out in any given direction. Most birds are not helicopters. They don't go straight up, even though to us, it's clear that that's where out is. That is not what they see or how they see it. So we're going to also look, oh yeah, check every fallen leaf. You might find banana peels, you might find all kinds of stuff, but there will also be birds. So corridor effect is when you can look through multiple panes of glass and see habitat on the other side. And having those direct sight lines means birds can see it too. So if there were curtains in here, you would still have issues with reflections, but you wouldn't have that issue with the through line, which you can see this building put up lots of stickers that don't do any good. So visual obstacles, that's the key, and we want you to keep thinking about that while we talk about habitat, because a lot of people think that window strikes either only happen at skyscrapers or lushly vegetated, amazing habitats. And this was on Zillow. Don't actually remember where it was. But like, yeah, this yard should not have a whole lot of strikes, but clearly most people don't put up those stickers unless it's an issue. So a mowed lawn is not an excuse to have dangerous untreated windows. This is kind of like corridor effect. We've got freestanding glass in the environment. This happens at bus shelters, this happens at train shelters, this happens at glass railing outside of buildings that don't always need railing, but whatever works for them. Glass balcony railings. You end up with, you literally can't see the glass at the Warren Avenue bus shelter. Whereas the train shelter on the right over here with the frosted stripes, that is the direction that we want to see things going. I personally would put the frosted stripes at the top and the thinner stripes at the bottom, but the idea there, granted it's for people, so people don't walk into it, so people don't startle other people, but that level of marking is what we want to see, intentional or not, for birds. So I do get a lot of questions about some things list clear glass / extremely low reflectivity glass as being safe, which is not consistently, it's not broadly applicable. Mirrored glass is not safe, even though you think a bird flying towards its own reflection would be able to swerve. That is not how birds operate. Their eyes are on the sides of their heads, and this is the equivalent of you needing to read text out of the periphery of your vision. Birds interact with the world in a very different way than we do. So mirrored glass, angled glass, tinted glass. I hear a lot of people talking about leaving their windows dirty. None of that actually makes a window bird safe. And unfortunately, since the at least early 90s, there has been this huge push to put raptor stickers everywhere, because yes, there is a study that shows that raptor silhouettes, when moving in the shape of a cross where the thicker end is going first, looks like a hawk, makes the chickens freeze. If you move it in the other direction, it becomes a goose silhouette and the chickens mosey around just fine. However, when they're stationary, it doesn't matter what the shape is. Birds don't see it as a threat. They see it as a fixed object to move around. So that is why silhouettes and stickers do not work. And here there are 4 stickers on this window. And unfortunately, there were 24, 25, there were a lot of strikes that, yeah, they did not hit the stickers, but the stickers clearly did not keep birds from hitting this window. And that is why, even if they're UV, inside of the window, outside of the window, this kind of spacing does not work. So unless you use a ton of silhouettes, they're not effective. But how many people are actually going to go all out with the spacing? Visually, it's pretty distracting, but unfortunately, we are looking for behavioral changes in 3 dimensions. So I'm sure between I-35 and everything else, we have all seen an obstacle somewhere in the road and had to swerve to avoid it. That is how birds operate. So if there is 1 object, 2 objects, they will go around or between. But to get effective 3-dimensional behavioral changes, you need to have adequate markings. And I like to use the example of teenager on a motorcycle, because the cones on the right probably will keep a teenager on a motorcycle from slaloming between the cones. But with further spacing, they might try it. And that's kind of how birds operate in the wild. They're used to zipping through branches, and branches, 9 times out of 10, don't have anything behind them that they're going to smash into. So this is when we get to what we can actually do to make it stop at our homes. We're going to cover some short-term, long-term custom things, off-the-shelf things. And you don't have to go with any particular one of them. You can try a little bit of everything. You can change it season to season. There are no rules unless you're renting or have a homeowners association. Then you might have some things to work around. But there are options for everyone. And the thing to remember is that what you see when you're looking out is what birds see when they're looking in. And this is a window that killed a goldcrest in Germany. But it was just a fantastic example of, like, it's not even a mirrored window, it's an apartment. Like, there's nothing fancy about it. But yeah, birds will hit any glass that is available in their flight area. So the most effective of anything is shade screens. Gives you some energy efficiency, especially in super hot summers, gives you plenty of privacy, it's UV protection, and things will not hit as long as they're down. So if you're in a room and you want the shades up, cool. You are making those windows high risk while you're doing that. However, on average, if they're down, you're golden. Even if they were to hit, that cushions their impact. ABC's bird tape. You can do all kinds of patterns, stripes. I want to say Benson has some of these in front of their windows by the hummingbird feeders. Estero might too. Thankfully, it's catching on down there, so I was really happy to see that. This is actually at Seattle Audubon. It's a nice example of how you can combine stripes, dots. You can do them at all kinds of different angles, but again, you need the close spacing. This is actually Jane's place. Mad props to Jane, and thank you for sharing these pictures with me. Acopian bird savers are amazing. You can put them up, take them down, wash the windows. The standard is 4-inch spacing. Some folks use 3.5 if they have a lot of siskins and smaller birds that are around. It's not too complicated to look through. It's not too complicated to install, and it cuts strikes by well over 90%. Easy to order, easy to DIY, so you have options. So here's another set of angles from Jane's place. And from a distance, you barely notice it, which is fantastic. Now, I also talked to Jane about these. I'm not really a fan because if you can't see it, birds can't see it, and bird crash preventers, in some cases, have been reported to work, but not all of them. And Jane actually took hers down because they were not working and put the Acopian bird savers up. So if you want to try it, go for it, but just know that it may not be effective and you might have to replace it with something else. But yeah, I think lighting there plays a very large part in whether or not they're effective. I do know of one installation where a bird hit and died and got tangled, and because it was a second-story window, that just the carcass stayed there, which is not cool for anybody. Kaleidoscape has a lot of options. It comes in all different colors, shapes, prints. They do have a clear product, which I am not a fan of. I suggest pretty much everything except that. But here's an example of their dots from the outside looking in and inside looking out. It's basically a perforated vinyl. So like buses use it for advertisements, car wraps as well. From the inside looking out, it's like looking through a screen, but from the outside you see whatever is printed there, or if it's a solid color, that's what you end up seeing, and it's pretty fantastic for preventing bird collisions. Feather friendly, basically does everything that Kaleidoscape does, but it is most popularly known for its DIY tape and its little square dots. I love it because the default is 2 by 2 inches, and 2 by 2 inches is the best spacing that you can ask for. Stripes will always be more effective than dots. However, 2 by 2 is hummingbird safe. Right now, generally across the industry, people talk about 2 by 4. That needs to be updated. Right now, best practices does suggest 2 by 2. Hummingbirds will still hit 2 by 4 spacing. Siskins, kinglets, gnatcatchers, basically any bird that is small enough to fly through a forage gap is not going to be particularly safe around the 2 by 4 inch spacing. But this is the DIY tape in action being installed. This is one of my school groups in South Korea. They wanted to know why birds were hitting the windows and how to make it stop. And their advisor reached out to me and we got them set up with some feather friendly. And yeah, it's awesome. They've actually fixed the vast majority of their school. And it's also used at residential buildings. This is in California. And again, like from the inside, you basically don't see it. And from the outside, you also really don't notice it. Solix is really cool. This is, I think, the Intuit building, I want to say in Santa Clara, don't quote me on that. It does make the windows slightly more reflective, but the stripes are closely spaced. Birds can see that frosted line, and overall, it's barely noticeable from the inside or the outside. It is a bit more expensive than most of the other products, though. So now the DIY solutions. These are my favorite. I've been playing with them a lot lately. There's so much freedom in designs and spacing and everything that, yeah, if you have control over your windows, this is awesome. You can do stripes. This is just plain white chalk markers, and granted a precarious ladder situation. The tricky part is reaching the taller windows, but again, from the inside or the outside, it's fine. I think we went with 2.5 or 3 inch spacing on these. I think it was 2.5. Yeah, basically it's like Acopian bird savers, except they don't move in the breeze. Again, with the stripes, a friend of mine had a ton of birds hitting her sliding glass doors, and her very small child helped her draw the stripes here. So she fixed it. It looks better. and that cut down on all of the goldfinch strikes. It's a fantastic way to engage children. You can do murals, you can do all kinds of things. I believe these were done on the outside of the glass. I really hope so, because we're about to talk about that. Because this is my new yard. So I moved 2 months ago and the windows need to be replaced. So that's not going to happen until next summer. And I didn't want to go for something that was permanent or long-term if I'm just going to swap it out again next year. But there's no homeowners association and nobody's in my backyard. And I felt the urge to doodle in chalk marker on the windows. And if you can't read it, it says this window is basically bird safe, but why? 1, external markings, 2, dense spacing, 3, high contrast, and it just needs you. So you can see from the inside out, you're still looking at trees. You can see the phone poles, like it's not really blocking your view. It's kind of weird to see some doodles up in the corner. From the outside, it doesn't look great, but that's because my handwriting is awful. And then this is, again, the main window, but also a side window that has a screen. So screens are fantastic. They don't get nearly enough love for being useful as a collision prevention option. And on the window next to it, you can see that our checklist of clematis, roses, hostas, ferns, peonies, and other things are being shuffled in the yard. We also inherited some bur oaks, maples, and pawpaws. So, hey, it's not a grocery list. I don't know why people don't doodle on their windows more often. Like, we have the technology, why not? Hopefully your families are understanding. Other things that you can do for funsies, like those Acopian bird savers, you can use string, yarn, paracord. You can hang densely spaced CDs and DVDs, assuming they're taking up too much space everywhere else. You can literally use soap as chalk. Lipstick smears a lot, but it is a fantastic medium for things that will actually last long term. Window chalk is super easy to wipe off with a damp rag. Otherwise, it holds up really well, even in extreme weather. The stripes that were in the earlier slide were actually put up, I think, 2.5 or 3 years ago, and they've survived a couple Michigan winters and summers, and they're still not even chipping. Beaded curtains are fantastic. Again, everything should be on the outside surface. You can use Post-it notes to do a checkerboard, which we're about to talk about a little more. But this window art on the right here, you can see why, where it's shaded, there is contrast, it's visible, but where it's not backlit, it's much harder to see the actual lines of the art. And that's because it is on the inside of the glass. And that is why outside surfaces are the most important. So again, with the Post-it notes, you can have the Post-it notes in the world. This is a gigantic Post-it note Pikachu at my local library. And you can see at some angles, the Post-it notes are highly visible. There's great contrast. You don't see the trees because of it. But at other angles, the trees actually out reflect the Pikachu. So even in a case where you have super bold patterns and colors and contrasts, you need a lot of that to overcome the reflection. So surface one, the outside of the glass, is the best place that any deterrent can go. On the right here, one of my friends went nuts with stickers because every holiday you just buy a pack of stickers and you just keep putting them up, and eventually your window's bird safe. Fantastic activity for kids. Neighbors are more understanding of this than, say, the doodling and weird patterns. But yeah, it doesn't have to be fancy, but spacing and contrast are really, really helpful. And for things that you can do at home, don't attract birds to danger. That right there, like if you have amazing windows but no way to fix them, then maybe don't try to lure birds to your yard in higher than normal concentrations. Native plants are fantastic. Skip as many herbicides and pesticides as you can. Don't ever use sticky traps or rodenticides. Follow the code of ethics. I don't want to hear anyone talking about playback around rarities or non-rarities in breeding season or otherwise. That's one of my biggest pet peeves. Contribute to science. Community science does amazing things these days. Between eBird and iNaturalist, the world is learning so much more about birds than we ever could have thought was possible before. And Bird Mapper, we're going to touch on that in a moment. So I hope you're bleaching your feeders at least monthly. And if conjunctivitis or bird pink eye or house finches with crusty eyes are an issue in your area, bleach the feeders or take them down. Like, bird health is really important, and contagious things happen. And if your neighbors aren't bleaching their feeders, maybe gently mention that. But it does take a community to keep things safe and healthy. Change your hummingbird feeders really frequently. Don't use red dye. Temperatures get super hot, and the hotter it is, the faster the nectar will go stale. So use a small amount, change it out daily. There's nothing wrong with that. Granted, if you're in Rockport, you're going through a couple gallons, like you don't need to worry about that. But yeah, like no more than 2 or 3 days in warm weather. Having your feeders on or within 3 feet is not a typo. It's physics. If a bird flies from 3 feet away into the glass, it has not built up enough momentum to kill itself or injure itself significantly. So the closer to the glass, the better. If it has to be further away than that, go for kaleidoscope, screens, some sort of very highly visible, ideally solid looking external product. Because if something spooks them, when they take off, like especially doves, if they panic fly in any given direction, they hit with so much force, it frequently ruptures their crops, and that's really traumatic for everyone. Also, don't feed birds if there are a lot of outdoor cats in your area. There's nothing wrong with not feeding. But on that note, build catios, encourage catios, tell your friends. Drink bird-friendly coffee. This is a huge one. Smithsonian certified involves a huge process of actually getting studies done on site at the coffee plantations. Yeah, it's an amazing thing for a lot of reasons. So not only are birds extremely important in managing coffee crop pests, but those little red arrows there, those are species that I've had in my freezer that hit windows. So yeah, the more birds hit windows, the more pesticides you get in your coffee, because birds are better at eating coffee borer beetles than highly toxic endosulfan pesticides are. So your options are either lots of birds and happy coffee, or not as many birds and extremely toxic pesticides in your beans. That is something that you can use to talk to your coworkers about. It's a weird topic, but if you like your caffeine, you better fix your windows. Or if you like your caffeine without pesticides, rather. So how can you help? I mentioned earlier, Bird Mapper. There's also dbird.org as opposed to eBird. Basically, if you find a bird, you can report a bird. Not everyone wants to pick up birds, and that's totally fine. You can still submit your sightings. However, if you do want to pick up birds, thankfully, the folks in Austin can help you with the coordination of monitoring and surveys and stuff. But if you are not anywhere near a monitoring program, there are ways that you can help contribute to science outside of these programs. I'm kind of a one-person collision monitoring program. Basically, everywhere I've moved, I've started some sort of monitoring effort or specimen donation habit. The first week that I was picking up stuff in Michigan, I had called the museum, was like, hi, I'm gonna need sub permits. And they're like, oh, you're 15 minutes away, just bring them in when you have them. It's like, but I'm getting like a dozen birds a day. I'm gonna need sub permits. Because you do need state and federal permits to salvage specimens. Beyond that though, nets, paper bags, unfortunately at low rises, you get a lot more dead than alive, but it's not terribly complicated. You just want consistent data. So we're not ending on a super sad note with piles of bodies. I do want to say that not only does Ann Arbor now have their new lighting ordinance, but my local library with the big shiny windows, their district is in the process of building a new branch library to replace a much smaller one. And courtesy of me hounding them since 2015, I think I went to every board meeting they had for like a year and a half and just read off the bodies that I had picked up. They are actually putting in bird safe glass at their new branch. And it's a product that uses 2x2 spacing. And I'm very, very proud of them. So if anyone wants to support the Ypsi District Library, I would encourage it. They might be a little confused by a lot of donations coming out of Texas, but that's never a bad thing. So yeah, congrats to them and mad props for doing something right. They did try noise deterrence, even though I told them that was not going to work, and it did not work. But otherwise, huge thanks to the folks who have made this research and a lot of the pro bono work possible. I started a Patreon just to see if it would offset the costs of my Ziploc bags. And it does actually offset pretty much all of the Ziploc bags and the Post-it notes and the chalk markers and the Sharpies and the index cards and the nets, and it adds up. And considering all of this was self-funded until I think that was the end of 2018. Yeah, it's awesome to have people who get it. Whew. And for the final slide of the night, the pile of references that I have mentioned. My page is justsavebirds.com. On Facebook, the happy page is Just Save Birds. I did not list Dead Birds for Science on here because that tends to be a downer. Animal Help Now is an app. It's a website. It's on Twitter. It's on Facebook. It is a phenomenal resource for all wildlife. The original research on all of the collision products for spacing, for everything like that. Flap.org they're Toronto based, they've been doing this since the early 90s. abcbirds.org is the American Bird Conservancy. All of these groups have done phenomenal work, and most of what I do is connect people with different portions of their work. But overall, this should be a relatively cohesive set of references for folks to take things and run with it. I will call out 101 Ways to Help Birds as being a wonderful resource for folks who aren't just looking at windows. Laura Erickson breaks things down into things you can do in the kitchen to help birds, things you can do in the yard, like very practical, relevant things. And then the oatmeal. You can't go wrong with sharing comics about how many things for cats actually kill. So I think I kept it under an hour, and I think we have time for a Q&A. I haven't been checking the chat, so if no one wrangle that.
Yeah, thank you, Heidi. That was excellent. So much really great practical advice. That's what we're always looking for, is ways to help. And it's funny, we were sort of coming up with questions in the background, and you kept answering them. So we were on the same wavelength. But I thought of one, and this isn't maybe a very practical question, but I feel like it's one that I would love to hear your response to. And this is true of, you know, just a lot of things that have anything to do with environmental problems, right? Some of this is really grim and it's hard to deal with, and it can really bring you down. And I just wonder if you have ways that you're encouraged, or things that you think about that help you feel good about progress that's being made, or anything like that, to try to, you know, balance out how hard stuff can be. Yeah.
I mean, full disclosure, I have an amazing therapist. It took me a few therapists, actually, because the first couple were like, let's talk about this bird thing. It's like, no, the bird thing isn't the problem here. But then I found one who was like, oh yeah, I'm a squirrel rehabber. And I was like, oh, you get it. So having friends who get it is super helpful. Being able to target your energy in ways that you know are productive. Like, I had a volunteer who really wanted to help with the collision monitoring, but every time she walked around the corner of a building, she was just like, I don't want to find anything dead. What if it's injured? Like, I get it. With my library, I walk around the corner and it's just like, I know there's going to be something. I'll walk around it once and I might not see anything, and I'll walk around it again and there'll be something fresh and warm to the touch. Like, it is traumatic. There's no way around that part. However, my volunteer who would not, it's fine. She actually ended up doing an entire art exhibit and donating proceeds to ABC. Like, not everyone is going to do the massive art project thing, but some people are better with advocacy and education and outreach. You can table at events. If you like doing PR stuff, there are opportunities for radio interviews. Everybody is looking for content on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, TikTok. Like, granted, those are very public facing things and you need to have your stats right. But there's not one way to go about this. And for the longest time, I was walking around buildings and just being horrified all the time. And then I realized that if I talked to architects, it made a lot more sense. Because when you pick up bodies, you talk to biologists. And I realized that biologists talking to biologists didn't change anything, because most of the campuses, even where the monitoring is happening, they don't have the funding to change it. They don't have the influence to change it. Like, there's always something that's not getting the change done. But if you target the architects and the sustainability people, they're just a bunch of different ways to approach the problem. And it's not necessarily one size fits all. So don't feel bad if you have existential doom feelings. That's, I think, highly appropriate right now. But yeah, Dead Birds for Science kind of actually started as a support group because people on my Facebook page were like, this is too depressing. Welcome to my world.
Yeah. There's actually a question that entered the chat that relates a little bit to what you were just saying about talking to architects and people who you might not have talked to before. Sarah Ruiz asks if you have advice about how to approach companies or building managers about especially turning lights off at night. If you have any talking points or any things that you do that like puts people at ease or has them be a little more receptive to this message.
There's actually a template letter. I want to say New York Audubon posted it. I can send you a link
great.
after the session if you want. But yeah, it's tricky because some people are extremely defensive and some are like, oh, you can help fix it. Thank goodness. We've been trying to figure out how to make it stop for a couple of years now. So everyone's a little bit different. However, if folks have ways to do educational things with schools, encourage all of it. Toilet paper, binocular tubes, go for it. Doodling murals, go for it. Having art competitions to fix getting kids involved is, I think, going to be one of the main ways we get this done. Because kids take that information home and it's hard to unlearn some of this stuff.
Yeah. Another person mentioned in the chat, and I see your list of lights out programs. You can add Austin officially to that list. We've been working on this for about a year, and on September 2nd, City Council passed a resolution in support. Oh, we are. Sorry, I went straight down to Houston and Dallas and was like, oh no. No, so we're real excited because that happened this month that City Council approved a resolution, and we have partners in the city and other state and local organizations that are working on this. And Michaela mentioned that Texan by Nature has a ton of resources that people want to post on their social media or share posts. We're trying to sort of coordinate all of our social media efforts to point towards that, especially during fall migration right now. So
thank you, by the way, for mentioning that lights out can be more than just peak migration nights and more than just seasonally. Because one of the biggest issues we found up here is Detroit Audubon was asking buildings to turn off their lights between 11 p.m. and 6 a.m. August 15th through like October 31st. And that's, on floors, I want to say 7th floor and up. Like it was 10 different levels of complicated when you can just say non-essential lighting, external lighting, year round ideally, but otherwise, August 15th to November 15th, the simpler the better. But because every year you get different building managers and there's turnover and nobody knows what switch goes to what, year round would be ideal.
Well, and you mentioned, light pollution has human health effects. Like this is not just about wildlife. There's other reasons. It also saves money to turn lights off. So there's lots of compelling arguments. I have one more sort of substantive logistical question for you from Jeremy. He asks, for windows with a dark tint and also reflective, would the frosted dots or lines still work?
When applied externally, yes. I include that caveat because there are some places that have, in new construction, intending to be bird safe, done those dots not on the external surface, but either surface 2, which is the inside of that outer pane of glass, as opposed to like if double pane windows are there. If you can't touch it from either side, it's in the middle. That is really not particularly effective. But for pretty much, there's an exception to every rule, but from the sounds of it, the dots should do reasonably well for a dark tinted building that is reflective.
Fantastic. Well, thank you so much, Heidi. I feel like we have so many good resources. I feel buoyed thinking about all the coffee I can buy and the people I can tell about lights out. It's very helpful.
I don't even drink coffee, but I give it away to people for Christmas, birthday, whatever.
We have some coffee lovers at Travis Audubon. We're gonna We're going
Awesome.
to do some damage there. But thank you so much for being with us. It's
Yeah.
been really educational and great to see you.
Thank you
And
all.
thanks
for being
everybody
here.
else. Yeah, thanks everybody who came tonight, and stay safe out there. We'll hope to see you very soon. So good night.